For those of you who just joined, welcome once again. What we're going to cover today is how to create an effective UX portfolio and then go over a couple of examples. And you'll actually get plenty of opportunity to ask questions, and we'll do a more formal Q&A at the end as well. We have invited an awesome guest today for you guys who will help us do that. And Danny will introduce himself in a couple of minutes. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Michael. I'm the founder of a company called BeginX. It's a part-time UX career accelerator based on real mission-driven client projects that helps people who know UX basics transition into the field in one of the most efficient and affordable ways, and without quitting their jobs. We can tell you more about that later on at the end of the event as well. So I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just to give you a bit of a background for credibility purposes. So we have run many cohorts, helped over 130 people or so probably by now get hired into UX roles. And here are some of the companies that they were hired by. So we've basically seen lots of people go through this entire UX career transition. Before we jump into the actual overview, let's briefly set the stage and cover some principles on how you can create an effective UX portfolio. And by the way, I will share the slides at the end of the event and also tell you a bit more about the program we run, since it may be a great opportunity for some of you, and make a special announcement. So stick around if you would like to hear that and download that slides handout. Basically, this is what we're going to cover today that already briefly discussed. We'll do the best practices overview after the introduction. Then we'll go over a couple of examples of folks who got hired by pretty well-known companies, and we'll do Q&A, and we'll do intermittent Q&A as well. So essentially, you want to UX this whole career transition journey and think from the standpoint of an employer. So what this slide covers, right? It's a very simple framework that we like to use, right? So it just consists of a few key steps in this UX career transition journey, right? The first step is most obvious, right? Just learning the essentials, so just some initial theory, basics, doing some exercises, practicing, understanding some of the key concepts. The next phase is basically probably the most difficult, the biggest, the longest one, right? Where we call this practice and grow, right? So it's not enough to just learn the basics to transition into UX role. You actually have to do a ton of practice, apply what you learned multiple times, so you actually have a solid portfolio, and that's what we'll talk about today in a couple of minutes. So during this practice and grow phase, and by the way, this framework just helps us set the stage and kind of ensure like what phase of the transition we're focusing on specifically. So this practice and grow phase also includes experience building and doing some exercises, maybe hypothetical projects, right? So basically kind of building yourself up. The next phase is creating all the assets, right? So that's your portfolio, resume, online presence. A lot of people get stuck in that phase as well. And the final phase is search, prep, and execution, right? So basically effective job search strategies and preparation for interviewing and execution. So basically, as you can see, we refer to this first phase, first couple of steps, right? Learn essential and practice and grow as learn and build, right? So this is like a product analogy, right? So essentially like building a product, right? That you will, after that, market and sell, which is stages 3 and 4, right? And it's important to have that distinction, right? Because basically, a big mistake people make is just not building a product during this learning and building phase that is strong enough, right? And then you can market and sell all you want, but it's just not going to be very effective. Sometimes the other mistake is basically, even if you do build a great product, right, in this learn and build stage, some people make the mistake of not learning the science behind marketing and sales, not practicing, not preparing enough in that area. And that way you can also get stuck for months or even years in some cases. And basically this just highlights, right, what we're focusing on today specifically, right? Creating the assets portfolio, right? And we'll probably touch on the practice and grow and kind of real experience and case study phase as well. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Danny, who will introduce himself. And after that, we'll take you guys through portfolio best practices, examples. So this is going to be real good.
My name is Danny Setiawan. Some of you probably know me from UX Support Group. And we do some events around UX, some virtual lunch and also in-person events in New York City and also virtually. For those of you who don't know me, I've been doing UX for a while now. Started before it was called UX. It was user experience design before that web design. And currently I'm working at AmericanEagle.com, not the clothing company. It's an agency. And we're actually a full service agency, digital marketing, development, everything. And I'm building UX practice here for companies ranging from agency to school. So I work for Yahoo Finance, for economists. I taught at General Assembly, Flatiron School, and also work with 2U and a few other companies, startups, where I met Michael, accelerators, and other places too. I've been involved from both sides, right? So I've been involved as a designer, but also from the other end, building up teams and hiring. And that's mainly what I'm interested in, like also training people to get hired. So that's the part that I'm really interested in, and it particularly relevant for this conversation is how can we make you competitive? And how can we get you to stand out and get the hiring manager's attention? Okay, so when you're creating a portfolio, essentially you are applying design thinking. And this is what design thinking method or framework visualize. So this should be very familiar for a lot of you. So we start with empathizing with the user and then defining their problem, not your problem, their problem. And then you ideate on the solution, really quickly come up with different ideas. You prototype it, test it, iterate, right? So this is just like another UX design project. Just so happen that you are the client in this case. You are the client and the designer. Empathize, we start with that, right? Who are your users? Hiring managers, recruiters, design leads, future clients, right? These are the people who come to your portfolio side. They are your personas. So they have different needs. Some of them overlap, obviously, and some of them actually care about very similar things, but they have differences in terms of what they know, which we will discuss a little bit, and also their needs, right? So let's start with that, with the recruiter. So normally the way that works is with the recruiters, there are two kinds of recruiters, right? The one is internal recruiter. Let's say when I work for economists and I was looking for somebody to work for my team, then I would work with the internal recruiter to create the job profile, the long list of requirements. I would give them that long list of requirements, and then I would also show them what that look like. For example, one of an actual conversations that I have with them would be like, what does this look like? Wireframe. Then I would just show them, okay, wireframes look like this. User flow look like this. Prototypes looks like this, right? So they have a checklist essentially of these different requirements, and then they are normally the first gatekeeper. When the submission comes in, the application, they would be the first person who look at the resume, checklist of these keywords against your resume, and then the portfolio. And then if they feel like it's got enough chances, then they would send to the hiring manager or design lead to evaluate further technically. They get a lot of applicants, just like with hiring managers, so they don't really spend too much time. So normally like 3 minutes, that's already long to look over your details. And this is the kicker. Most of them hire or recruit for multiple roles, right? They recruit for development, for even like finance, for accounting, for the whole company. So when I was an economist, we got like hundreds of people in New York office and probably only 2 people recruiting. So they need to really, just cover everything. And for that reason, there's no way for them to go deep and know the actual function, right? Like, for example, they wouldn't know what wireframe is until you tell them, oh, this is just basically boxes and arrows. And like, oh, okay, that's what that is. So just to keep in mind, that's their limitation, right? And this will come into play a little bit later. So what do they look for? So what kind of designer are you? This is typical. When they're looking to fill a role, it would start with, what kind of designer are you? Are we looking for a UI designer? Are we looking for a graphic designer, right? Or are we looking for UX designer? And what's the difference? What is your process? So basically to assess whether you know what you're talking about. What makes you different? What makes you stand out against other competitors? Okay, next one would be the design lead. So let's say you pass that first gatekeeper, then normally the recruiter would send your resume and your portfolio link to the design lead. Design lead, a lot of times are also the hiring managers, maybe different in some companies where they have bigger teams. In smaller companies, they're the same. This person could be your boss, not always, but could be your boss. A lot of times this is the case. They want to know whether you're competent, innovative, and good at what you do. The reason for this is pretty obvious, right? The reason why they're hiring, why they have an opening is because they're overworked. They have too much work already, so they need somebody they can rely on, somebody who can think for themselves, which is why they need somebody who know the design process. The process is the steps to get to a reliable, good outcome, right? And they want to know that you're good at what you do, as they like knowing the process, you know how to ask the right questions, when to ask questions, have the initiative and all that. What do they look for? Did you make good, informed design decisions? Your decision-making process. Did you balance multiple needs? The needs for the business, of course, to make money, the needs for the users, the end users, which is normally what we focus on, but if you don't help the business make money, you don't really get paid, right? Because the business needs to pay us and we get paid by the business. And the third one would be the feasibility from a technical standpoint, right? The engineering side. Are we going to have technical debt? Are we going to be able to reuse some of the code that's been built? And then as part of that, as you know, UX is not a solo thing, right? It's not a solo function. We need to work with the other functions. So we need to first gather information, but also we need to hand off your information to communicate it to the developers, to the people who produce content and all these different functions. How do you do that? And this is related to the first point, which was, did you make good informed design decisions? How do you know if it was good? Well, do you track the results? That's how you know. Because I like to tell, this is something that I like to tell my designers, my students, good or bad is not a good way to assess design. What you need to do is to use effectiveness and efficiency, because those two can be measured, right? The result can be measured by effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness means that the user complete the task, get to what they're looking for. Efficiency means that they get there the fastest way and the easiest way possible. So now, after we empathize with our personas, we need to define the problem that we're solving with the portfolio. So what do they need really? So it boils down to learn whether you are the right fit. But what does that mean though? What does that mean that you're the right fit? So we already discussed this a little bit, but let's dive in. So the first thing is whether you are competent or not, right? To convey that information, you use case studies. You demonstrate that you've done it. You've been there, you've done it, you deliver good results. And you made good decisions along the way, right? Proven work. So that's the first thing. Second part is they want to know if they could work with you. If you are very good at what you do, you're very competent, you're very talented, very skilled, but you're an a-hole, then they don't want to work with you, right? But and also, if you're like as boring as a rock, they probably won't be interested in working with you. So they need to know your passions, your experience. Essentially, will they want to work with you? So then, knowing that, how do we design the portfolio? How do we demonstrate your capability, your competency, your past experience, as well as showing who you are? So first, we're geeking out on the UX here since this is UX related. So we do that in IA, right? The IA should be super simple. From the home, should be easy to get to the case studies about you, and allow them to contact you easily, right? All this needs to be easy because the experience of your portfolio site is the first and the best way of demonstrating what you can do for them. It's like if you went to IKEA and the furniture sucks, then you probably want to buy furniture from them. Homepage and about me. The homepage, the one thing that I want to make sure that you, a lot of you do is to just claim it first, your identity. I've seen some portfolios where they said that I'm an aspiring UX designer, I'm a this, and I'm also transitioning to UX designer. No, 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 don't do that. Just own it already, because you're not going to hire an aspiring dentist or aspiring doctor. Even though they're fairly new, they're a doctor because they can already do the job. The same thing with you. Just own it already. And then the work, right? Make sure that you show the work on the homepage. One of the worst thing that you could do is to bore people with your bio on a homepage, and they get lost and they don't know how to actually get to your work, and you don't get considered. Next. So this is the first part, the splash, where we talk about the just claiming it. This is who I am. Just keep it simple, right? Make sure that you use the keywords. Remember earlier with the HR people, the recruiter, right? They're trying to fill a role. I get this question quite a bit. Should I call myself UX designer? Should I call myself UX UI designer, product designer? The right answer is whatever they're buying, that's what you're selling. Okay, so how do you find out? Do your research, go to Indeed, go to LinkedIn, find out what are the jobs that you want. It's called, what do they call you? Because it's gonna be changing too. Back, like I said earlier in my intro, back in the day, they call this role web designer or information architect. In fact, like my first real UX job at Yahoo Finance was UED, user experience designer, with an E in front of the X. So call yourself whatever the market is calling, so that, again, the HR person, whoever is trying to hire, they don't have to think. Remember that book, Don't Make Me Think? Applies here. And don't make them think. UX designer, I'm hiring for UX designer, I'm at the right place. The project list. Show the most recent one, the most impressive, and then this shows like a really good example of the different set of experiences. For example, in the middle here, just by glancing at it, you can see that this person has done some branding, has done some design for tablet, for desktop, for mobile, right? The same thing here. See, like this is a mobile experience. This is mobile. This is, well, this is actually our mobile, but this is responsive. Looks like mobile with the HBO Now, with the again supplementing the TV experience. This one looks like a responsive because they're using O2. See how you can quickly communicate a lot by using the splash, like these thumbnail images on the homepage, right? So the do's and don'ts: make it personal. Focus on showcasing recent projects. Don't make it too long to get to the project. Don't make it too hard to get to the project. So we talked about that a little bit. Don't make navigation convoluted. Don't show irrelevant stuff that is distracting user from their goal of assessing you as a UX designer. Don't distract people with cool design trends like parallax scrolling. Some of these are fine if you're trying to showcase your front-end development skill, but sometimes getting too clever and too creative could actually hurt you, because the reason why the hiring managers are here is not just to see your front-end skill. Mostly, first and foremost, they want to see your design thinking process, right? So if they're distracted by the this cool fancy stuff, even worse, if they don't work as smoothly on mobile, for example, or on other devices, then they could actually disqualify you. And then the about me, this is the the part where you show your personality, whether you're fun to work with, right? And then in this case, the example from Alex here on the right is a good example also to brag a little bit. Name dropping is always effective. In fact, you may want to include this on your maybe even homepage, right? And then here, Lauren did a good job with like showing, again, these are like, she call it process, but essentially these are the keywords, right? We talk about the keywords that the hiring manager gave the HR person listed here in the bullet points also, so the HR person could easily, oh, blah, blah, blah. And some of these should also make their way into your resume and to the portfolio, the case study part of the portfolio also. So for the about, add personality, this is where you show personality, explain your journey and how it relates to UX, tie it back to UX, right? So if you came from sales background, how that can help you with empathizing with users, right? And become solution centric and try to solve problems. Have a picture of yourself, and again, identify the kind of designer that you are. But don't write a novel here. Don't tell your life story. Again, no one likes to read, and in fact, no one reads anymore on the web, particularly. Don't mention anything that cannot relate back to UX, because that could, who is this person, right? I remember reviewing a portfolio not long ago. The first screen was like this person who is transitioning to UX, but still a music composer, and he combined the two. I was so confused. I was like, am I here to hire a composer? So yeah, make sure that the two are connected without too much thinking. No one wants to think. Okay, quick Q&A. I know that was a quick and a lot.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, so we'll take a few quick questions. Any questions you guys already have so far? So Doma is asking, you mentioned the IA should be simple. Is this a must?
The question is, why would you want to make it more complicated than necessary? That's what I would ask you. I mean, everything should be as simple as possible.
Like Einstein said, right?
But not simpler than that.
Exactly.
Anastasia asks, are there any chances for designers with no website, only Behance, for example? Yes, the answer is there is a chance, but normally not as high as if you had a portfolio website. Unfortunately, that's becoming the standard these days. And also sometimes for me, like when I look at portfolio site on Behance, it tends to be a lot more visual based. It's just like a lot more just like showing the visual as opposed to the process. Not necessarily the case. You can use Behance to show your process also, but that's been my experience, and it formed my impression of Behance or these other portfolio sites. Michael, any thought on that?
Yeah, I think it definitely, if you really, I mean, Behance, I don't think it's going to be enough usually, right? So it's typically, yeah, you must have like a UX portfolio if you want a UX. I mean, it's not a, I don't want to say it's a must, but it's like, you know, if you're switching careers, if you're transitioning, it's really, really, really important. And it's almost, you know, unless you have very good connections already somewhere, it will be almost impossible to actually land a UX role. So you do need a very strong UX portfolio with great case studies. So now we have a few more questions. So Mary is asking, if I have a background in law, should I not mention that on the website since it's not really relevant?
I think the relevancy of that is something that you can decide, right? So the good thing about UX is that it overlaps a lot of disciplines. I would argue that law is, is relevant to UX in the sense that you need to understand, you need to work with people also, right? You need to empathize with them. And there are like the rules, but then also they're like the human factor of it. Particularly relevant if you're trying to leverage them, try to work in the area where law and tech merge, that could be a really good, for example, if one thing that just comes to mind these days, there's this thing called smart contract. It's on blockchain, right? A contract is a contract. So with law background, you can actually have a competitive advantage there of utilizing the technology and designing the experience that actually could be utilized in the real world.
Thank you, Danny. So actually, we have part 2 of Dilma's questions. So she's clarifying answer to Danny's questions about what you might want to add, why you might want to add more. It is to showcase a variety of skills I have, in my opinion. For example, I'm a designer with fine arts background. I have a lot to showcase, and think it would be amazing employers to the other traditional design work I have done, even though it's not UX related.
So it's like this. I'm going to use an analogy for that. Let's say that you went to a restaurant. The chef is super talented. The chef could do all kinds of cuisine, got like Thai, Italian, sushi, Chinese, and Lebanese, all that. And I'm like, yeah, might as well throw in like a few other things, Indian also. Versus a place that specializes on sushi. What's the difference in terms of the perception there? Well, in my opinion, if the place shows me that they can do everything, then I'm like, oh, they don't specialize on anything. Most likely the quality of what they deliver may not be as good as the place that specializes on one thing. That's the perception. But the problem with this process of UX portfolio and trying to get a job, trying to get noticed, is that, again, no one has the time to actually do the due diligence, right? To actually investigate whether you are actually very good at everything, or you just claim to be everything and you're not actually good at the thing that they want to hire you for. So with that also, the same thing, like I'm thinking like I go to a place and they're trying to claim to be too many things, then I'm like, nah, I'll go to the place where they claim to be that thing that I'm looking for. So that's why I think that unless you can actually showcase, for example, in fine art, right, with illustration, storyboarding is probably a good deliverable to include in your process. So bake it into the process to understand, empathize with users. In that case, then I would highly recommend including that. But I remember reviewing a portfolio with from somebody who's also got a fine art background, and one of the tab is jewelry design. Another tab is something else with I think sculpture, or no, pottery. And that confused me. I'm like, which one are you? Are you trying to do UX or what is it? I mean, of course, you can always connect the dots. But in my opinion, if you add too much, that could actually confuse your users.
Thank you, Dan. So another quick and very, very popular question. So Jillian is asking, how many case studies do you need to have as a new designer? Will one case study and some smaller projects be okay?
Okay. So the best way to do this at the end of the day is really to test it. But typically, when I teach this in the live workshop, I would ask the question, if you were the hiring manager and you saw only one piece, would that be enough? Normally, the answer is no. 2, no. 3, normally that's when people start to say yes. Now, whether all 3 are fully fleshed out case studies with the complete design process, I don't think it's necessary to be on that level. But I think the one thing that I want you to take away from this is that a lot of times people ask, my former students ask this question to know what is the minimum, right? If you want to get noticed, you want to be extraordinary. Extraordinary, in the way I describe it, is that you want to be ordinary, meaning that you meet the requirement with some extra. Okay, so what is that extra? The extra could be more projects. Instead of 3, you have 4. So imagine like you're being a hiring manager again, we're empathizing with the user. or HR person, you saw portfolio, 3 projects, 3 projects, 3 projects, 2, 3, 2. Oh, Jill has 4. You become extraordinary. You get noticed, right? So that's, to me, smaller projects that with not quote unquote complete process is fine, as long as you have at least one with a complete process.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, and just to add to that, based on a ton of our own research, usually the magic number is 3. And that's pretty much what Danny was saying as well. But it also depends like what those 3 are, right? It's not enough to, let's say, 3 hackathon case studies, a hackathon project, right? They need to be sizable, comprehensive, and basically, bigger projects, right? So ideally for a couple of months or something like that each, part-time, I'm talking about. But again, that's a little bit subjective, right? Essentially, it's the magic number is usually 3. We specifically recommend having a couple of those with real clients, because that will actually make you stand out a lot. That will give you that real experience that, that way you can actually have that on your resume, on your LinkedIn, right? Because if you don't have something like that, it's going to be much, 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 much harder. That's the whole reason we run the program with real clients, right? Because it just makes you much more marketable. So let's take one more question. For transition into UX, is it more realistic to look for freelance/consulting/contract work before looking for a full-time role? So I can just address this briefly, and then let's see if Danny, because we've encountered that like many times. Essentially, you just want to be open to any type of work, right? So work is work, right? And then basically, whether it's full-time or volunteering or contract or freelance, right? It's ultimately, of course, it's going to make a huge difference, but not when you're building yourself up, right? You just need to do work, and it needs to be, as much of it needs to be real as possible, right? So basically, the answer I would say is any work, volunteering, pro bono, freelancing, contracting, or maybe even full-time role right away, that can work. But essentially, yeah, it's basically just do real work. Danny, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, +1. That's it.
Okay. Awesome. So let's move forward with the next session and actually talk about case studies a little bit and give a couple of examples, and then we'll pause again after that, and we're gonna give you guys a chance to ask more questions. We'll try to address most of the questions live for you.
All right. So now we're going to look at some examples, or before that, what to show in a case study, what decisions you made and why. So we talked about this earlier. One of the main things that the hiring manager, the design lead would assess is whether you can make good decisions or not, right? Reliably, so that they could let you make decisions, right? So they could actually have you help them with the design work. So as part of that, they want to know the methods that you use. For example, you're doing user research, right? Somebody mentioned they're getting into research. Which method do you use? Why do you use survey? And how many people? And how many people are enough? Or do you do survey now, or do you do survey after we launch? Do we use NPS? Somebody from marketing said NPS. Do we use SUS? For those of you who are not familiar with NPS, it's Net Promoter Score. This is a lot of times used in marketing and customer satisfaction, essentially. And SUS is System Usability Scale. This is a way to measure usability of a system. It's been around for many years, since the 70s, I believe. Or different ways, the other ways, right? For task completion and a lot of things like that. So which method do you use? What to design? Do you design this page, that page? If let's say you had to pick 5 templates, 5 screens to design, how do you pick? And of course, demonstrating your skills. And this is something that, especially for people who are starting out, is something to show, especially if you just completed bootcamp and whatnot, what you learned and how you grew through that project. create a template. This is very, very important. And the template should include overview section, research, ideation, testing, iteration. So this is essentially, again, loosely following that design thinking, right? So the overview is just to give the user the big map of, okay, this is where we're going. This is what this project is about. And then you go into the research to empathize, define, and then ideation, and then you get the prototyping, testing, and iteration. And you want to create a template and the final result, of course. You want to create a template because you want to develop consistency between your case studies. Some people who came from the creative background, graphic designer, or from art, sometimes want to be too creative, as in making every single case study very unique. There's a case to be made for that, but then from the usability perspective is normally a bad idea because, again, the users, in this case, HR person, hiring managers, they only have seconds, right? It's less than a minute normally to review a portfolio. If every single time they move from one case study to another, they need to relearn what's going on, what you're showing, then they would spend more cognitive effort into getting into your content, to actually assessing you, which is the opposite of don't make me think. You're making them think too much. Make sure you explain the why, again, the decision-making process, why you made certain decisions, so they could have confidence in your decision-making process. Add personality. This is very important. Number 4, give credit to teammates. If you're working in a team project, I disqualified some people in the past when I discovered that they took credit for the work that their teammates did. Don't make it all about pretty images, unless you are really, really, really focusing on just the graphic design. If that's what you're looking for, if it's UX, it's not about the pretty image. This does not say don't use pretty images though, because I'm sure some of you use some of the dating apps like Tinder. You don't swipe on the personality, you swipe on the face. So the pretty images still matter, but you need the substance also. Don't only show UI or final images, the same thing. List every single thing you did on, don't list every single thing you did on a project, because then it becomes too long, right? Pick and choose so you can tell a complete story without having to go too deep into the details. And don't have projects on there that aren't your best work. You know, you want to show what you can do, and if you're not proud of it, don't show it though. That's normally the rules. Some examples from Lacey here. We're going to dive into this first case study. So as you can see, UX researcher, product designer. Okay. Keyword UX research, product design. These are different projects, easily read more. Music instructor studio app, the overview, right? TLDR, the overview is needed, the solution, the impact, the team, and the particular role, right? So this way, as a user, I know that this is what she can contribute. And then kickoff, the challenge, initial assumption, the research, trying to empathize with the user, the different method interviews, usability test, and the findings clearly stated. And then also another research method and synthesize it, showing the process, right? And then persona, document that, bring it together with the journey map. And what does all mean? Blah, blah, blah. And this is the insight from the research. Moving on to solutioning. So that was the problem space. Now moving on to solutioning. The IA, lo-fi stuff, mid-fi, wireframes, testing, usability testing, part 2, findings, hi-fi, the designs up close, and conclusion, the next steps, right? So this is a typical thing that I would do to review a portfolio. Is from the top like this. I'm just gonna be like, okay, what do they have? Like, okay, can define the problem team, what's the role, what can they do, the different research methods, the findings, different method again, and just like scrolling like this to see the artifacts. right? So this way I could identify the keywords, also use the headings like this. Okay, so now we're going to look at another example by Eduardo. Again, really quickly, when you land on the page, you know he's a product designer, and then the project's right here, right? So I think for this one, we are going to look at the repeat roses. This is an overview. There's the story behind it. This is the challenge. And then overview of the process, right? And then the role. Talk about the different methodology, comparative analysis, and get to the personas, the journey map, and then start solutioning with lo-fi, some user flows, Medfi, and then some usability testing, even style guide in the end, and final iteration. And some takeaways and next steps. So you can see that within less than a minute, I could get a sense of what Eduardo could do, what Lacy could do. FAQ, how many case studies should I have? We address that. What if I have a project I can't show because of a non-disclosure agreement, NDA? The biggest thing here is NDA typically is meant to protect the company, right? To protect their trade secret. So let's say that if that secret, the secret sauce, if you will, make it to the public, then they could lose against their competitors, because their competitors could steal that secret sauce, and they would lose the competitive edge. So for that reason, a lot of times if it's already live, the product is already live, then you can show it. Another thing that I normally say is that a lot of times you can just show it and then ask forgiveness later. Don't ask permission, because normally when you ask permission, then a lot of times the client will be like, no, don't show it. But if it's not really hurting them, I think it's okay. But that's my controversial opinion. So the last one, when is my case study considered done? When it could get you that interview, right? When it describes your process completely, done as in like the story is complete. Done not as in the quality cannot be any better. You can always improve it, and you're going to evolve as a designer. You're going to get better, so you will always find ways to improve it. But again, the purpose of the portfolio is not to win a design award, but to get you interviews. With that, these are some other pages that people have, testimonials, some of the passions, like, you know, I think this is something that people like to show. I'm not sure personally. Again, this is part of the conversation with Dolma earlier. I think with all of these, since we know user research, the best thing to do is to actually test it. There's this tool called Hotjar, where you can actually observe how people experience your website. And if you think it's going to help you, put it out there, right? If it's going to get you more, if it's getting you more interviews, you think, then put it out there. And then track the result. For example, a lot of you who went through bootcamp or going through bootcamp, you're actually required to apply to a certain number of jobs every week, right? So use this, create a spreadsheet and track it. Do version A 1 week or 2 weeks until you have enough information. Do another version 2 weeks later. So keep optimizing. And don't forget the design process. This is to say that at the end, iterate, iterate, iterate. And I think that's it.
Awesome. So let's do more. Thank you, Danny. Let's take some more questions. I see we have quite a few questions there. So Lilac, and let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, whether it's Lilac or Lilac. I noticed you saying, I noticed that Lacy's portfolio is pretty text heavy. Is that something we should avoid? How to decide how much copywriting is appropriate to be included in each case study? What do you think, Danny?
The real answer is test it. Do usability testing, right? So as UX designer, you should know how to do usability testing. The way I would test it is I would find some job profiles and list out the keywords listed there, and then find somebody, participants, of course, to test it. It doesn't have to be an actual hiring manager. It'd be good if you could. If not, just a friend, some friends, and then give them the list of keywords. Ideally, this is depending on whether you want to emulate the design lead, hiring manager, who are familiar with the design terms, or the HR person. So depending on the friends, right? And then give them, let's say, a minute to go through your portfolio and see how many keywords that they could find. They could see, like, demonstrate in your portfolio. As simple as that, right? And if the text is actually helping them discover these keywords, then maybe you need more text. Or if they're saying, oh, you don't need to describe enough, maybe you need more text. But I think in most cases, Lazy is actually quite text heavy, but because of the layout and the use of headings and visuals, to me, it didn't feel like it was too verbose or too text heavy. Because I clearly didn't read, but I was right now just remembering. I could imagine the portfolio, and I remember that she did the different research methods. I remember that she demonstrated competitive analysis, demonstrated some survey user interviews, I believe, and usability testing. She demonstrated lo-fi to hi-fi wireframing. I'm not sure I saw prototyping, maybe, but I remember seeing the hi-fi for sure. Some IA work also, and user flows. You see, like, within less than a minute, I noticed all those things.
Yeah,
That's what makes it effective. But
yeah, that's a great point. I think also another big mistake that people make is actually not having enough copy and enough text. They just think that they should just put the deliverables out there, so it's more like a UI portfolio, right, with just like the final output. And that's what is crucial in the UX portfolio, is for you to basically tell a story and describe that whole process and talk about each phase. So that's what is often missing. That's why your case study can even start as just a regular, like, Google Doc, right? Where you're just writing out, structuring it, and probably most likely is going to start that way. And then after that, you're going to add all those additional deliverables.
The way Michael described it is actually the best way to create a case study, which is start with like a Google Doc or anything that's just like text and pictures, right? Like, that doesn't require setting up Squarespace, Wix. Don't use those web builders to start with. Just have your story and your assets there first, and then you can figure out which platform to use. Because at the end of the day, it's about the story. And one product that could be good for this is actually Medium, because it still looks good, but at the same time, it's focused on just the storytelling part, not the like all the bells and whistles, like the parallax on these things, like navigation, all these things, which could be distracting you from creating the case study. Okay, just one thing to add. So I saw questions about, like, too long, not too long. So when you show your portfolio to people, get feedback, one of the things that could be really confusing is that you will get different kind of feedback, even from people who are about the same level of experience, right? Some people will say, oh, too much text. And then you show it to somebody else, oh, not enough text. Show it to somebody else, oh, too much visual, not enough visual. Just keep it 3, just show the best work. Oh, you need to show 5, you need to show more. How do you know? This is why you need to test it and measure, because that will continue in your career also. You will get feedback from all kinds of different directions. Sometimes people give feedback because they want to provide value, but they're providing too much value because they think that by saying nothing, by saying that, oh, this is already good, this is already working, then they're not giving you value. So be careful with the feedback, just like with usability testing, right? We observe patterns, again, to lead towards effectiveness and efficiency. So measure it.
Thank you, Danny. So I know you have experience in all the phases of the UX process, but maybe even more on the design side of things, right? But you have a question from Anthony. What advice can you give a prospective UX researcher in developing a portfolio and creating case studies? What differences should be observed versus a UX design portfolio? Do you have any thoughts on that, Danny?
Yeah, because if I wanted to hire a researcher, then I would like to know more about the research part of the process, right? I could care less about the design system because that's not part of research, or style guide, mood board. I don't need to see those. In fact, I don't want to see those if you're uh, positioning yourself as a researcher. But I would like to know the research methods that you could do, and like I would like to see your methods and more robust analysis of this different research of the research that you've done.
Thank you, Danny. And by the way, I see, Anthony, you rewrote your question to be more UX portfolio focused. Thank you for that. Yeah, feel free, guys, to put more questions in Q&A tab. I know we still have quite a few. I will try to address as many as possible on the relatively limited time we have. So Shreya is asking, is Notion a decent platform to land a job? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, Shreya, whether you are referring to Notion being a platform to host your portfolio. So if that is the case, do you want to clarify your question briefly? And if that is the case, Danny, what do you think about that?
I like Notion, and at the end of the day, to land a job, it's not about the platform. Notion, I know that with Notion, you can also publish it as a regular website. And from the user standpoint, you don't care if it's Notion or WordPress or Squarespace or Wix. Just make it work.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, in terms of platforms, it's not a huge difference, to be honest, right? You could go like more fancy and use like Webflow or something, right? But it's in reality, it's more the content itself is what is most important, right? And it's basically what you did, how you describe it, how you tell a story, right? It's not about the platform, really. So Elaine has a great question here. If your most comprehensive case study with a real client is over a year old, and your most recent works are passion projects, not real clients, what is the best hierarchy to showcase your work on your portfolio and resume? What do you think, Danny?
I think it's fine to show the old work as long as they're still relevant.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say in your portfolio, it is key to go with your, basically think from the standpoint of the employer or hiring manager or recruiter, right? And basically show the strongest one first, right? So make sure it's right there, right? Your biggest, most comprehensive one, the one you're most proud of. So it grabs their attention. It's more likely that they actually click on that one first and basically get a better impression about you, right? The resume, LinkedIn, it can be a little bit more tricky, right? Because you want to show it in like, what do you call it, reverse chronological format usually, right? But with many projects, right, unless they're real, it's actually hard to show them on your resume, right? Or on your LinkedIn, at least not on the professional experience, right? Because it's not really a professional experience, right? So you can probably put it under like projects or additional work, right? But it's hard. That's why real clients are so important, right? Because you can actually market that to employers as real work, right? And basically have that on your resume and your LinkedIn.
And just something to add to that, at the end of the day, think of this as your user, the hiring manager or whoever is trying to really just complete that checklist as much as they can, right? They have a checklist of, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? And and in that case, that they want to see these things, the skills demonstrated, right? So with that in mind, give them the experience that allows them to complete that task in the most efficient and effective way. Maybe that means that putting the older work above the recent work, if that helps your user, then do that, right? So one way to figure this out is to look at the list of keywords from the job profile. What are they looking for? If your most recent work does not demonstrate those, then maybe put an older work that actually demonstrate that.
And by the way, I also see some folks when sharing their LinkedIn and Q&A, or to just make sure you, if you did that, put that in Q&A before, make sure you put that in the chat. We definitely encourage networking and basically keeping this as interactive as real life as possible, right? So highly encourage everyone, if you want to connect with others, to put your LinkedIn or to put your info in the chat. Yeah, use the chat section, not Q&A. Okay, so we have another. So to kind of come back to that case study from Lacey, I think Dolma was asking whether that first case study example was too long. Actually, what do you think is too long? So we kind of addressed that. Danny, do you want to add anything to that?
No, for me, that was fine. I got what I was there for when I played the role of evaluating that as a hiring manager.
Yeah, because essentially you want to see, right? It's great to have those comprehensive end-to-end case studies, right? Because you want to see that the person can actually, do the work in all these different phases, right? And actually describe and tell a story about it, right? And then pivots maybe, based on the findings that they have, because that story can change, right? Especially if it's a real project that you're doing, right? You may get some interesting insights, and that can change the direction of your project. That's actually very interesting to see in a case study.
So one really practical way to answer this question is, again, like to install Hotjar. They have a scroll map. So you could see how far users actually scroll. Do they get to the bottom? Do they scroll only like halfway? Then you'll know if it's too long or not.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a follow-up question about how important, I know this is not exactly portfolio, but how important is, as a hiring manager looking for a candidate, how do you care about their LinkedIn profile, right? So let me just share a little bit about that and resume as well. Based on our research and interviewing lots of hiring managers, obviously it's not as important as your portfolio, right? The portfolio is like the most important part usually. But the problem is resume or LinkedIn can be like as the first step quick screener, right? And if they see that your resume design, for example, is not that great, they may just not even get to your portfolio at all. So that can happen sometimes as well, similar with LinkedIn, right? So it's definitely important. Danny, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I also use LinkedIn to assess whether I want to work with you or not. So one way to do that is normally I scroll down and see the kind of reviews that you got from your colleagues or past colleagues and the reviews that you give others. What kind of person are you? What do they say about you? And what do you say about others? Because I could learn a lot from there.
Okay, Shreya is asking, what are crucial elements that will make a case study stand out? So just gonna repeat that for you, Danny. What are the crucial elements that will make a case study stand out?
So to me, it's not just one thing, but the overall experience, right? So meaning that, again, I could get, as the selfish hiring manager, I'm coming in to complete a task. I'm going to give you the context. I'm already overloaded. I got too much work. And now I got 50 portfolios that I need to review. So I'm spending an hour sitting down and reviewing these portfolios, right? The more you make me work, the more I don't want to talk to you. The ones that stand out are the ones that are, again, extraordinary. So the first filter will be like, go there, or you're not even a UX designer, out. You're not even a UX designer, out. UX designer, how many pieces you got? Oh, you got at least 3. Okay, then you're in. I'm interested in it. Okay, looks decent. I'm gonna go in. Right. So that's my thought process. I go in. Do you have the typical things that I need, like the problem statement, the overview, the roles, the research, the information architecture, user flow, wireframing, prototyping, usability testing, all the basic things, right? So I'm trying to find these things, and if you're making it hard for me, then that's, even though it's not like explicitly stated, it'll be like, this is not fun, right? That you're making it hard for me. Then as a user experience designer, this is what we do. So to make the experience stand out, you need to make it as easy as possible and delightful for me even. So for example, one of the things that this is probably useful actually for you guys, that I recommend is not to have a prototype link, but to show a video of you walking through with the prototype process, with you narrating it if possible, so it can have personality, but also there's a context. The worst is when I click on a prototype link, taken to like freaking InVision, not Figma, InVision, and the thing doesn't work, or I don't know what to click on, and I'm like, I don't even understand the context. You can't expect me to know what I'm supposed to do there. Then I'm just like pogo sticking and clicking around, and I got lost. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? How do I know that this is the journey that's right? So make the experience as nice as possible for your user. And the way you know this, again, usability testing is your tool.
Really appreciate your time. So I know we're running short on time. So hope you guys enjoyed the event and got some great tips for your portfolios. We'll give you an opportunity to ask any other last minute quick questions all the way at the end. And talking about great portfolios, as promised earlier, so let me just quickly tell you about the program that we're running, since it may be a great opportunity for some of you to not just build an amazing real client portfolio, but also get all the crucial career prep necessary to actually land a UX job. So basically what BeginX is, it's a part-time UX career accelerator program with real mission-driven client projects that helps people transition into UX without quitting their jobs. So far, we've run multiple cohorts, helped over 130 people transition into UX. Alumni of the program have been hired by many top companies like SiriusXM, Coach, Google, ABC News, Meta, or Facebook, many others. And recently, we have also been ranked by SwitchUp as one of the best UX programs. The advisors are also mentors and also UX practitioners from companies like Google, IDEO, American Express, The Economist, and many others. So who the program is best for? The program is the best fit for people who know UX basics or are willing to learn those independently, or come from a design, research, creative, tech, or related background and look to transition into UX in one of the most effective and affordable ways and without quitting their current jobs. Right? So we're also pretty selective and look for committed team players specifically. What you gain after completing the program is you build not just hard skills, but also the critical softer skills, real experience with a robust portfolio, expand your professional network, and get ready to land a UX job. And in fact, our grads have done so well that we offer a money-back guarantee. Basically, you land a UX job or you get a tuition back plus an extra $200 on top of that. So if it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more at beginx.com. And by the way, these consultations are designed to be not just some quick program pitch, but provide an opportunity for you to learn about UX career transition best practices, pitfalls to avoid, get guidance and personalized advice, and ask questions about your own UX career switch and how the program can help, and see if you may be a good fit for the program. Right. So we're going to run different types of events. So we'll keep you guys updated about upcoming events and share resources via our newsletter that is usually sent every few weeks or so. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to our wonderful speaker for taking his time to join us and provide all the valuable insights. It was a huge pleasure to have you here, Danny. And if anyone has any other quick questions, we can hang around maybe for a couple of more minutes.
Can I add one more thing there?
Of course. Yeah.
So I think there are two things that this program would be super, super, super helpful for you guys. One is, of course, the real world experience, because there's nothing like a demanding client. And then like that creates pressure, and that leads to the second part, which is the teamwork, right? In the field, UX is always played as a team game, right? You have to play with other functions. The soft skills is more important than the hard skills, if anything. So the more I grow in my career, so now the one thing that in the interview, so fast forward after portfolio, you get the interview. The one skill that I really try to assess is the presentation skill and communication skill, more than creating wireframe. Creating wireframe, user flows, prototype, those things are the easy part. So the soft skills and also being able to manage clients, manage stakeholders, which come from like real business cases, real use cases. Those are the hard things. And these are the things that normally the boot camps don't teach, unfortunately. Some boot camps actually offer the client project, but even that is normally like with a lot of times it's pretty well defined, as in like, so you don't really need to deal with the problems. So this is why this program is so valuable. And when you go to interviews, this is something that even I think Amazon does this, right? They want you to demonstrate all these different core values that they have. And to demonstrate that, you need to tell a story. Now, that's what you're actually collecting here, not like deliverables, but stories. So when you go to interviews, you can say, yeah, there was this one time when this difficult client asked for revision, and then we did this, blah, 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 blah. That means you've done it. Then that demonstrates your decision-making process, and that could actually instill confidence in the interviewer.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, those are great points. And I think it's definitely, I think it's like another common mistake is people think that hard skills is like the main thing needed to be able to land a job. And it's basically it's important, of course it's important, but it's only one of those core things. And if you look and we research and analyze hundreds of candidates, hundreds of job descriptions, and you can see soft skills are huge, basically, right? It's often even more important than hard skills, right? There, you can be like an amazing, amazingly skilled designer, but if you cannot work in a team, if you cannot work with others, I mean, it may be very hard to actually get anywhere, right? Because and you want to not just tell that to employers, right? You want to actually be able to show them, to demonstrate, to show here it is on my resume, here it is on my portfolio, and give talk about examples in interviews as well. So it's basically that's one of the key reasons we run everything in a team setting and with the real client, and it's basically because it's the soft skills part is really huge. So any other I think there you go, Anthony, another quick question. So should case studies be a web page always, or can they be downloadable PDFs for hiring managers to take home? Very specific question. Thank you, Anthony. It's usually both, right? It's actually a lot of people have both a website and then you have a portfolio presentation. We should do that in a program as well. Like we cover both. And because sometimes you may need to create a custom portfolio presentation. Let's say maybe you just want to cover the most applicable case study. But yeah, website is usually right now it's the standard. It's probably like the first thing. Danny, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, don't make me download anything or like print anything out. The printer may not be working. So most likely, if that's the case, if I had to actually download and print it out to take home, sorry to say, I'll skip you. I'll go to the next person who can make it easier for me. And this is particularly true for people who are still in the junior level. When you're in the director level, very senior, then you may be able to get away with like PDFs, because that's harder to find. But for somebody who are trying to break into UX, there's so many people who are trying to get that same position. The competition is just crazy. So for that reason, then the hiring managers will not spend the extra effort.
Yeah, great points, Danny. So we have another question from Tabara. What tips do you have for finding teams to work with collaboratively?
Well, the easiest way is to just get Michael to do it for you. Because, well, I mean, like that was joking, but not joking, because the consultation and all this process is designed to actually bring together people, like-minded people with the same focus of wanting the same thing, right? The problem with team is that I've facilitated this in the past through as part of the meetup group, like people doing together to do hackathon project for some client that I found. People are not committed in a lot of cases. One person just disappear after like few days. Oh, something came up, because you don't know each other, right? So community could be a good way to find people, but the best way to get people committed is to actually when you're paying money, you'll be committed because you want to make it worthwhile and you want to get the outcome.
Yeah, and you can also, I mean, essentially, right? Here is kind of some additional tips, right? So you can do online hackathons, right? You can also join various online communities, right? Various Slack groups, right? It's not like it's like hidden special information or something. Basically, let's say what everything we're offering in the program, right? It's also possible to do something similar on your own, right? The problem is it's just going to take you probably 3 times longer, right? So if you value your time, right, it's basically, you know, and you may not even get there because it's very hard to stay motivated when you do everything on your own, right? But essentially, if you were to do this on your own, right, you can find a team, use these Slack groups, Slack chats, communities, Facebook groups, etc. You can also find clients. You can find clients to volunteer for, right? It's just important to actually persuade them and basically sell them on working with you, right? Because that is not easy either. That is not always easy even for us, right? To actually have a great client. So it's not just because you want to ensure that it's a good project, right? You want to ensure that it's a comprehensive project. If you want to work in tech, you want it to be a tech product, not just like a static website, a landing page that you're designing, but you want to be an interactive, dynamic project, right? Product, right? Where you can design a flow, not just one page, right? So it's all possible. It's possible to do it that way, right? But it can just take much more effort, right? And much more perseverance and motivation, right? And etc.
And I think one more thing to add to that is that just because you have a team doesn't mean that you could have a successful project unless you're experienced in running projects, right? If a bunch of, you get a few people who are all entry levels or juniors and trying to do a project together without a lead, that could be a disaster. That's why in a program or like in a boot camp, normally they provide, or even hackathon, there's like mentors to provide structure to guide the team, right? That's the part that's normally more difficult, to create the structure and also to scope out the project itself, right? To make sure that it's not like something that ends up being 2 years with nothing to show, or like something that leads you to getting exploited by the client.
Yeah, that can happen too. It's and we, by the way, we actually ran an event a few months ago specifically about experience building and case studies, right? So not portfolio side, but like the actual projects, like the case studies, right? So eventually that will be available to on our website as well. And you can also take a look. There are a couple of other event recordings there, actually more than a couple, quite a few, where you can learn a ton basically about this whole transition. And I see that Anthony put his email. Anthony, do you want to just move that to the chat? Because once we click answered, I think this question might disappear. So Anthony is looking for a team. So Tabara, Anthony's email is right here in Q&A, maybe in the chat as well. Thank you, Anthony. So we have another, okay, so now people are putting some more questions. Great. So we have a couple more minutes or so. So Kai is asking, how much value do you place on UX designers with social media accounts beyond LinkedIn with content versus designers without social media? I'm wondering because I'm a private person and don't really put effort into things like Twitter and Instagram. What do you think, Danny?
Well, social media doesn't all mean TikTok, Instagram, Twitter only, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the question really is depending on where your market is. Market in this case, you're hiring managers, right? If you want to get hired by somebody, for example, for NFT stuff, for people who are building NFT product, they're heavily on Twitter. In which case, then you want to be on Twitter. You want to be active on Twitter, right? But in most cases, I think like the best social media is probably just LinkedIn, and probably, I don't know if this is considered social media, but Medium is a good place. And also possibly Quora, because those are places where you could demonstrate your knowledge, your ability. And with Medium, it's longer form. So you could like explain more, be more comprehensive compared to your case study.
Yeah, that's a good point. Last question from Dolma. Maybe I think it's a good question. A lot of people actually have this question usually. If I'm writing a case study about a project I did with a team, should I focus on what I did? I felt like that might make the case study fragmented, because the case study can only be a story if I mention what each of us did in order. I have the struggle right now writing my case study.
I would include everything, but make sure it's super, 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 super clear what your role was. Because here's the story. So I interviewed this woman. She, in her portfolio, she has Uber. And then I was like, oh, okay, you did work for Uber. And during the interview, I discovered that it was actually not commissioned by Uber. She just decided to do that as a student project with her classmates. That's one already, like, she didn't mention that, right? So make sure if you pick to do a redesign or something like that, then you clarify that if that was not commissioned by that company. The second, she said that, yeah, we did this, we did that, we did this, and then, oh no, actually she claimed like, I did this, did this, did this, this. And then I was like, okay, so which part of this whole thing that you did? And she was like, yeah, I did the user research. Oh, the entire user research? It was contextual inquiry. That's impressive. Then I asked more questions, right? How did you create the question, the script, blah, blah, blah. I discovered that she didn't create the script. And then I'm like, okay, so how did you moderate this? How did you get it if you didn't create it? She did not moderate it. Then I'm like, so what did you do? She was observing and writing down her observation notes on Post-its. Did she get to the next round? Nope. But for the case study, she got the interview because she complete. But that's an example that use the complete process, so the person who's reviewing your case study knows that you understand the process and you can speak to it, but clarify which role that you play.
Yeah. Usually, basically, what you can do is, as Danny mentioned, you basically list out to describe the whole project, all the phases, but maybe earlier on in the case study in the beginning, you just point out who is your team, what the roles were, maybe what their names, etc. Right. So that's typically the standard best practice, right? So you don't want to take credit for other people's work. So that's why you want to point out that you were part of a team. And that's actually a selling point for you. It will make you more marketable, right? Because there are many more people who, let's say, because there are lots of these courses, right, that people do, but they do everything on their own. And the problem is most employers look for team players, right? They want you to be able to collaborate with others, not just do stuff on your own, right? So that's, and also another quick tip in terms of team building and basically related to that, as Danny mentioned, definitely get some type of mentor, right? Can be hard, again, right, to just persuade someone to just like keep helping you, right, all the time for free and many times and meet with you, etc. But it's definitely possible, right? So you can maybe persuade someone to do that. Continuity is important, right? So it's not just like they just meet with you like once in 3 months, right? But if you're working on a project, right, you work with a client, right, those touch points are important, so they guide you, because otherwise you can just go in the wrong direction and just waste a ton of time. So basically, and that's what happens sometimes when people volunteer, because you're not an expert in UX, you're just starting out, the client may not be an expert in UX, and then you put 2 and 2 together, and it's just, sometimes it's a recipe for a lot of wasted time and frustration, and not a great result. And also make sure you talk about NDAs in the beginning, right? Because the worst thing, not the worst, but like one of the things you don't want to have is you do all this work and you work for 3 months for them, right? And then it's like, oops, you can't really showcase it in your portfolio, right? Because of an NDA, right? So NDAs are okay as long as they don't preclude you from showcasing your work in your portfolio, right? So that's a mistake that a few people I've seen.
And one thing to add, if they're not paying you, unless they're giving you something in return, don't sign the NDA. Why do the project if you can't use it? Especially if it's pro bono. If you get paid, that's a different story.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's actually, if you're not getting paid, what is great about that, right? Besides, is that you have more leverage in terms of negotiating the project, right? Because if you are getting paid, right, typically they tell you what to do, right? So they can be like, oh, we have budget for this phase, but not for this phase. But in the reality, right? In the beginning, you're not earning, you're still learning, right? You're building yourself up. So your goal is not to make money at this point, right? Because you're not going to make much, right? That's basically another mistake people make. Just doing a lot of these like freelance tiny project, whatever they are asked to do. And then they have like all over the place portfolio with these UI projects, right? Which doesn't really get you hired into full-time UX folks, right? Instead, you just have more leverage and you volunteer, do pro bono work, etc. Again, if you can persuade everyone, the client, the mentor, the team, etc., right? It's again possible. It can just take a long time, and it can be very hard to do on your own. But you can do something like that and ensure you plan out the project in advance, right? You can structure it, right, so it actually moves in the right direction right away, and you make progress, right? And it's actually valuable for the company, but make sure it's valuable for you, right? Because you don't want to just do whatever you're told. You want to make sure that this is beneficial, right? That's the, because otherwise, why would you do it pro bono? Right? So unless we have any other, I don't think we have any other questions. All right, so it looks like Tabara and Anthony connected. And maybe gonna form a team. Congrats. Feel free to share other contacts. Danny, any other last words of wisdom about portfolios?
I think the main thing is that don't focus on quality as a start, focus on just getting it done first. So if you're waiting until it's perfect, most likely you will never apply for a job. So just get it done first, get the content done like what Michael described earlier, get the content, brain dump it into a Google Doc, Word doc, whatever, Notion. Don't worry about the design of it. And then just dump it to like Medium or Squarespace, whatever, once you have the content, and then make it pretty after you're done. Don't start with making it pretty. A lot of times especially for people who come from a graphic design background, I include myself here, we tend to think that, oh, yeah, I want to make it nicer. I want to make this prettier. This is not ready yet. This is not ready yet. We think that we're giving ourselves that excuse, but actually what we're afraid of, what we're avoiding is rejection. We're just trying to avoid rejection, because if we apply and we don't get the response, then that's rejection. But unless you try, then your chance will be zero. That's all.
Exactly. So that is a great point. And by the way, one last point on Kai's question, right, about online presence and social media, right? So what we learned so far, right, is usually portfolio, resume, LinkedIn is sufficient, right? Your great, strong case studies and real experience are going to get you hired. And basically a good way to think about it is blogging, in addition to that, as Danny was mentioning, right? And basically sharing some insights, right? That can be used. It's not a must at all, right? It's not a must, but it can be helpful, right? So you can kind of show you and position yourself as a thought leader out there. So that can be helpful. All right, so we're out of time by now. Again, Danny, thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for joining. We hope you really enjoyed the event and really got a ton of value. Feel free to reach out. Danny, is there a good way for the audience to connect with you anywhere?
LinkedIn is a good way, but also just come drink with me on Thursdays, or come join us on Fridays on Zoom. So UX support group. That's the on meetup.
If you're in New York, and if you're not in New York, we also run our meetup group, User Experience HQ, runs virtual happy hours monthly. So you guys can join those as well from anywhere you like, whatever you
bring
prefer.
Your own drink.
All right. Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right. See you. Cheers.